One of the things I discovered as part of my studies of the Qur'an is the importance of context. What does that mean? Okay, so the explanation goes something like this. So let's talk about context first of all. Now, one of the things you will have heard me explain, and pretty much every other student of the Qur'an will understand, is that when we're trying to understand any particular verse of the Qur'an, we must look at the context. You cannot really understand the meaning of a verse properly without understanding the context in which that verse has been revealed. But what is equally important is the context, not just surrounding a particular verse, but the overall context given by the message of the Qur'an. You see, there are some overarching principles which God describes, which act as touchstones for us when we are studying the Qur'an. The way I think about it, that there are two different types of context. There is the big picture context, if you like. Let's call it the macro context. So there's the macro context, and then there's the micro context. And the macro context, they represent the pillars on which the message of the Qur'an, the guidance from our God, is built. So let me give you an example. So when God says in chapter 17, verse 70, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we have conferred dignity on every person. That is a macro context. What God is telling us is that every single person, every individual must be given respect and dignity because they have been created as such by God. And once we understand that basic macro context, so many other things become clear to us. For example, when we start to consider matters relating to discrimination, racism, the rights and obligations of men and women, husbands and wives, how we should deal with other people who do not share the same faith as us. That basic macro principle helps us to understand the guidance and the instructions of God that relate to the treatment of humans, individuals. And understanding the macro picture, the macro context, is really important. Not just to help us to understand the Qur'an itself, but also because I've noticed that even genuine students and proponents of the Qur'an, they are often in dispute with one another about the detailed meanings of some specific words, and they become divided over those specific meanings. And what they do, I think, is they forget the big picture. The big picture, the big messages that God is giving to us. And once we understand these big picture macro context points, it helps us to understand the more detailed points as well. Unfortunately, too many people forget the big picture and they become embroiled in debating and discussing and disagreeing with each other on some of the minute detail. So that's macro. Now, in terms of the micro context is when you look at a verse in the context of the surrounding verses or the topic that God is discussing or explaining to us. So let me give you an example. Let's say that there are a group of verses in the Qur'an where God is explaining to us how we should address and treat our parents. So there's a whole group of verses, there's a discussion, if you like, going on about how to treat parents. Now, if there is a word somewhere in those groups of verses which could be translated I don't know, to do with food. We're not going to take the meaning that relates to food. We're going to take the meaning which relates to the topic being discussed, which is parents. All right, so that's understanding the micro context and making sure that when you study the Quran, you are taking the meanings of a verse which is mindful of the context in which those groups of verses which surround that particular verse are discussing. So bear this in mind, the macro context and the micro context. Today, though, I want to be talking macro. So let me come on to talking a little bit about balance. And we will link it into macro context in a minute. So my eyes recently came across chapter 87 verses 1 and 2. Sabbih isma rabbikal a'la allazi khalaqa fasawwa. The first verse here, Sabbih isma rabbikal a'la. Extol the limitless glory of thy sustainer's name, the all-highest. But it's the second verse that I want to focus on. Allazi khalaqa fasawwa. Who creates and proportions. This is such a small verse, but it is so important. Now most people will read this and just move on. This very small verse. But you know the real fun happens when you stop and ponder. That's when the real fun happens. And that's when the real growth happens within us. When we stop and ponder. And this verse is definitely worth pondering over. So this word, fasawwa, is made up of the root letters Sin, Waw, Ya. And what this means is something balanced, something equal, proportioned and level. Okay, balanced, leveled, proportioned, equal. So God is saying that He has created everything which is balanced. Everything has been created in balance. And when I started to think about this, it really opened my mind. Think about it. Think about the entire universe. Think about all the spatial entities, the planets, the stars. Everything is working in perfect balance. Everything is working in harmony with each other. Their energies combining to make the universe sustainable. There is a perfect pattern to what is happening out there. And then when you come a bit closer, look at the earth. Everything on earth, again, is completely balanced and in harmony. Look at nature, the way biology, geology, chemistry, physics, everything combines to create the system in which we are living. And everything is being nurtured and nourished within that perfectly harmonious set of forces. Our own living is dependent on and driven by the balance that exists between the environment, the animals, the vegetation. Can you see how everything is balanced? Everything has to work perfectly together to maintain this perfect balance and a sustainable life within this universe. Everything that I mentioned here, the environment, the vegetation, the animals, they combine, for example, to produce the food that we eat. It nourishes us. This earth feeds us because of this balance. Everything comes from the earth. And even look at the ocean, the ecosystem within the ocean itself. There's a perfect balance being maintained in the ocean through its food chain. And what's even more fascinating is how the ocean serves us. Our own well-being is connected to the ocean. For example, through the role of the ocean in absorbing huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. which a lot of people don't even realize. If we destroy the food chain of the ocean, which is happening by the way, if we continue to pollute the ocean, which is happening by the way, we are so connected with the ocean that if the ocean perishes, the life of the ocean perishes, then so will we. That's the balance between the ocean and us. That's the connection between the ocean and us. When I think about this, I think closer to home. Think about us as humans, perfectly symmetrical beings. We've been given pairs of eyes, ears, hands, legs, feet. We're perfectly balanced. Let's look even closer. Look within us. Our entire system inside us is a system of perfectly balanced and harmonious energies and functions of organs. And even when we look deeper, if you look at the mechanics of the cell, inside the cell, you have a set of perfectly harmonized, balanced energies and power. A perfect ecosystem within itself. It's absolutely incredible. And these sorts of powers, the powers within us, we haven't even yet fully discovered as mankind. So once we begin to understand this, once we begin to understand the balance within the individual systems in this universe, and the balance that comes with the connection between different beings like us and the ocean, us and the environment, us and the animals and vegetation around us, us and the universe, you begin to understand that everything is connected and that we are connected to everything and we are connected to each other. Allazi khalaqa fasawwa. Okay, now let's think about macro context. So by pondering over this verse as we've now just done, we've actually uncovered a macro principle here. This macro principle being balance, maintaining balance. And now we can connect that with the instructions from God in the Qur'an. You see, when I've studied in depth the meaning of many, if not most, of the instructions from God, they are in some shape or form connected. So let me explain what I mean by that. So let's just say we take the instructions around doing amalan salihan, righteous deeds. Let's take when Allah instructs us to do ihsan with our parents, ihsan. Let's think about when God instructs us to spend in a particular way, anfiqu. Let's think about zakat. Let's think about the instructions around proper diet and health. Let's think about the instructions around business and employment. Let's think about the instructions around the operation of law and order in society. Let's think about the roles of the husband and wife with respect to each other. The words which God has used around these commandments, whether it's salihan, whether it's ihsan, whether it's anfiqu, whether it's zawj, whether it's zakat, whether it's haqq, there is a connection between all of them, and that is restoration of balance, restoring balance, removing inequality, correcting the balance. You see, this is the macro contextual point. And it's really important to understand this contextual point. So let me give you an example to bring this to life. I've often wondered, and people have often asked me through the comments on our YouTube channel, what counts as righteous deeds? What is amalan salihan? And I've often wondered, if I do this, would that be counted as righteous deeds? If I did this, is that righteous? What are righteous deeds? What counts as such? And there are several examples in the Qur'an. God gives us examples that this will be a righteous deed. This will be a righteous deed. So he's explaining, he's giving examples to us. But it is not an exhaustive list. So we need to understand what is the criteria for something to be considered a righteous deed. And if we look at the deep meaning of the word salihan, and when you understand this context, this macro context we've just understood, what you understand is that amalan salihan is about removing imbalances. It's removing people's imbalance. And that could be an economic imbalance, it could be a domestic imbalance, it could be a medical imbalance. It's about helping people to stand on their feet again, about helping them to recover the balance so they can self-sustain themselves with dignity. That is amalan salihan. And that helps you to then decide, okay, if I do this, would that be amalan salihan? Is that a righteous deed? Is that what God wants? It's about restoring balance. The same is true when we think about when Allah says, do ihsan with parents. You see, our parents, when they get older, their capabilities naturally diminish. They could experience hearing loss, their eyesight becomes weaker, their memories become weaker, physically they become weaker. And you see, that causes them disbalance. They find it difficult to stand up on their own in society. So when Allah says do ihsan with your parents, what He is saying to us is you have to then help them to become balanced. You have to become their eyes for them. You have to become their ears for them. You have to use your physical strength when they've become weak, so that they are not insecure and their vulnerabilities become covered through our own strengths. Can you see how it is about bringing balance back to their capabilities and their lives? Ihsan. So all of these different words, if we look at the meaning, the connection is bringing back balance. And that's why understanding balance is so important. Okay, but then one should ask, why is God instructing us to bring balance if everything has been created with balance in the first place, naturally? Why is that the case? Well, you see, the thing is, God tells us, and we know, that man has been given freedom of choice. We have choice. Unlike all other features in nature and all the other forces, we have a choice. And you see, we have this thing, and we have studied this before. We have this thing called the rebellious spirit. And this spirit aims to throw us off balance, the natural balance. Right? So we do have a natural balance with everything that we discussed previously, but the spirit throws us off. It represents our ego. It represents our instincts to be arrogant, our instincts to be jealous, our instincts to want to hoard materialistic possessions, our instincts to seek power over others. That's the rebellious spirit. And all those negative energies that the rebellious spirit incites us towards, all those negative energies cause disbalance. And God tells us in the Qur'an about how history, as well as the present, is proof that mankind, gives in to this instinct, to the rebellious spirit, and it causes disbalance. When we give in to this spirit, to this rebellious spirit, we become the cause of imbalance. And think about it. This imbalance can be seen all around us. Consider, for example, the divide between the rich and the poor. This vast inequality, such that on the one hand, you have these super rich individuals who don't know what to do with their wealth, they have so much. And on the other hand, you have the poor, the young children dying due to malnourishment, starvation, disease, before even having had a chance to do something with their lives. The indignity of mankind. Another macro principle, remember? وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. This disbalance has resulted in the indignity of mankind. Consider the wars, the physical wars, the cyber wars, the political wars. They are all designed to grab, to capture, to rule, and maintain power over people and resources which are produced by this earth, to create this disbalance between the powerful and the powerless. Think about racism and other forms of discrimination, the disbalance, the indignity. Think even about the hatred that we see between people that follow different religions and faiths, and even within the same religion and faiths, the hatred and division that's caused by this instinct, caused by jealousy and the need for power, the imbalance caused by hatred. Think about climate change, which has been brought about by us, whether it's through the Industrial Revolution which took place, the tearing down of rainforests, the likely extinction of species in the oceans that we are causing, which are crucial to the balance of our climate. All of these things, we are destroying these things. We are destroying the balance. Climate change is a disbalance caused by mankind. And these are just some of the examples of the damage that mankind has done because of the way it has chosen to use its freedom. This damage that we've done to harmony. And this, by the way, in the Qur'an is referred to as fasad. And if you look at Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 11, God says, and when they are told, do not spread corruption on earth, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, they answer, we are but improving things. I mean, it's so true and applicable to our lives today. This gathering of wealth, this gathering of resources, the destruction of rainforests and oceans and the environment is done because mankind convinces itself that it is for the better. It convinces itself that this will lead to more wealth and better well-being for mankind. That's why it has done this. That's why it continues to do this. So how true and how applicable is this verse? Do not spread corruption on earth. And they answer, we are but improving things. And then verse 12, oh verily, it is they who are spreading corruption, but they perceive it not. Allah innahum humul mufsiduna walakin la yash'urun. They perceive it not. We do not even see it. We're blind to it because we've given in to the rebellious spirit as a species. So we have corrupted the balance. And if we can, and let's think about this. If we continue to destroy something which is balanced, imagine if we've got something balanced and you continue to do something which causes disbalance. What's going to happen? You fall. We will fall. We will be the cause of our own destruction unless mankind learns and changes. And I'll do a separate podcast on this. So we've talked a bit about balance and why God is instructing us to bring balance, because we ourselves have given into the instinct of destroying that balance. Now let's think about what this means for us. What have we learnt from this? What is God telling us? I mean, I think when I think about the macro context here, that perhaps the purpose of our lives is to bring back balance. It's to bring mankind in harmony again with itself and the wider environment within this universe, to achieve perfect harmony. Because surely Only then will we experience the peace and tranquility which God promises in the Qur'an. Perhaps that is our purpose. Perhaps it is to strive and struggle and persevere to bring back and maintain balance. Perhaps this is the haqq, the truth. And this is what we have to struggle for, as God tells us in Surah Al-Asr. Perhaps this is the essence of ibadah. Perhaps this is submission to God. Perhaps this is the test. Perhaps this is the essence of our bond with God. Maybe this is the deal. Maybe this is our debt to God. The meaning of deen. That in return for all the favors that He has already bestowed on us, we bring back the balance. And perhaps that is what will lead us out of hell and into paradise. Perhaps it is all a matter of balance. So have a look at how we started with chapter 87 verse 2, or verses 1 and 2, and look where we ended up. Look where we ended up because we pondered and we applied and we thought about what it means. Look at how it has given us an important macro contextual element for our wider studies into the Qur'an going forward. Now, before we end today's episode, don't forget you can get in touch with me. Do get in touch with me, please. Let me know what you thought of this. Any comments and thoughts that you might have come across as you're pondering with me. I hope we all find our path through the lens of the Qur'an. Until the next episode, Assalamu alaikum.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن